Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology. Today I'm going to talk about our new Cygnus, the Swan Constellation Talismans, and just do kind of a dive into Constellation Talismans. So, as typical, I'm going to step back and rather than immediately start talking about constellations, I want to talk a little bit about causality. How does this stuff work? And I think this is an issue I think it's a hot issue. I don't think a lot of people are focused on it, but I think it basically determines how you think this stuff works is going to determine everything about how you approach talismans, how you work with them, how you make them, what you do with them. And yet it's an issue that people just don't even, consciously think about very much. So again, as I always say, worldview is really key. Worldview is your unconscious view of reality as well as your conscious philosophy. Basically, it is your reality. And the modern worldview is atheistic materialism. And atheistic materialism says basically nothing exists except matter and energy. That means there's nothing spiritual. So it's not just no God or the guy with the beard with the thunderbolts that'll zap you if you do the wrong thing. It's no soul, no ESP, no ghosts, no spirits, no spiritual, ESP or telekinesis or energy or anything like that. Nothing spiritual exists whatsoever. And when you say spiritual, it basically just means psychological. And if you say psychological, you're just talking about the brain, which is a physical organ. You're talking about brain function. And then brain function is just, and this is the other thing you do in modern worldview, it's just, so it's reductionist. Brain function is just chemicals and electrical impulses. And those, chemicals are going to be molecules and atoms, and then electricity, and it all comes down to subatomic particles. And either those are determined by physical laws or random interaction. So everything is just physical laws of physical things or random. That's the view of reality in modern. Now, layered over that, and that's consciously or unconsciously how people see how things work, is a lot of stuff, for example, belief in God or, people doing magic or astrology or whatever. But if you ask them how it works, they're going to fall back on the atheistic materialism. So generally, when you ask people about talismans and magic, how does it work? Almost invariably the answer is going to be, first people might say it's symbolic, but that's not an answer because that doesn't say how, symbolic is not real. So if you're really getting effects out of it, how are those effects coming about? It's not going to be symbolic. The basic answer is energy. Okay, so that's really the causality that everyone it's the go-to concept that everyone's using to explain astrology and magic and everything like that. So the problem with energy as an explanation, first of all, there's significant numbers of people that think that it's magnetic or it's something scientifically detectable form of energy. This is clearly not true. There is absolutely no scientific evidence for a material or energetic causality for astrology and magic. Okay, so that's one of the major reasons why they think it's fake, is because it doesn't fit within their worldview, therefore it can't be real. So other people are like, well, it's spiritual energy, so it's like energy, it's an impersonal force, but it's not detectable scientifically. And so that's pretty much how people are explaining things. And for example, that explains how people approach talismans. So a talisman is like a battery. It's charged with a particular kind of impersonal energy, and then it radiates that energy out. That's why you got to wear it all the time. And then eventually it has to be recharged because it's run out. So that's our model, and that's how we approach it. And again, if you're done with it, you throw it away. If you want to give it to somebody else, it's no problem. It's like an iPad. You can always give your iPad to somebody else. I suppose you have to transfer the account or whatever, but basically it's all interchangeable. It's all fungible. It's just a dead object, and you can do whatever you want with it. It's for it's there for your use. But they're all alternative approaches. And I don't want to come in and say atheistic materialism is bad or it's wrong or anything like that. I'm just going to say there are alternative approaches. And this energetic approach is really, while there's some similarities with some traditional views, in a lot of ways it was not the mainstream view. The traditional view of first of all, energy, the word is, in terms of force, that's a scientific term from basically from the 18th and 19th century. And the sort of, you see things like, Alkindi's on the stellar rays, they're really thinking of the spiritual rays in terms of light. And along with that spiritual rays, they have a much more sense of consciousness and aliveness with the rays than we do. The key sin, I saw some book recently talking about magic, trying to explain in terms of quantum mechanics, and it was all, multiverse and all this sort of stuff, which again, I don't understand how that really plays into it. And again, there's no scientific evidence for that. But the key sin is personalities. It's like it's okay to have all sorts of weird quantum effects and action at a distance and all that kind of stuff, but you cannot admit the existence of any kind of personality with that stuff. It's all in impersonal forces. And that is much more palatable to moderns because of the insistence in science, basically, that there's no, these are all impersonal forces. And the other point that I've made is that we don't really understand scientific energy. You think about light, it's like photons, so like little bits. No, because a photon is simultaneously a wave and a particle. Okay, that's really weird, and it has no mass. That is not like any little bit of anything that I conceptually have ever dealt with. That's totally weird. Or electricity. Electricity, it's not flowing electrons. Okay, there's not like the electrons flow from the generator, into your electrical outlet. It's like what you've got is a situation where the entire field is energized simultaneously at the speed of light. So if you turn that switch on, boom, it seems instantaneous, but it apparently happens at the speed of light. But again, the entire field is energized. So again, we do not even understand scientific energy. Okay, so to use that, mapping that as a concept for astrology and magic is even more problematic. Particularly when you talk about, like I said, something like, you could sort of see how maybe a natal chart, again, because modern astrology is mostly natal, that maybe that's a map of the energy flows or something like that. I mean, that's sort of possible at the time of your birth, that it was beaming something at you, Saturn. The problem, this paradigm really breaks down when you get to horary, though, because the time of the question, the time that you give the question to the astrologer, at the astrologer's location, time, date, and place, gives you the answer to the question. I mean, how does energy or beams or anything work with that at all? Clearly, that only works because of the incredible patterned quality of the cosmos. Nothing happens without being part of the plan. Nothing happens outside of this sort of patterning. Now, of course, this patterning is incredibly complex and very hard to figure out. But nevertheless, that's one things that, to me, having done 5,000 horary questions, it reveals to me a very, very ordered cosmos that's not based on energetic or material causality. So what are some alternatives from the traditional worldview, traditional methodology and approaches? And one of the key ones, I did a video recently about spiritual causality, so direct causality by angels and spirits. Of course, there's evil spirits as well. That's, again, pretty major idea. That's probably one of the main focuses of how I do my astrological magic practices, based on direct contact with these spiritual personalities. But another approach is this idea of occult virtue. And so, first of all, again, we need to translate into modern terms. Occult doesn't mean bad or malefic or dangerous or anything like that. It just means hidden. And virtue doesn't mean ethics, doing the right thing. It means power. So basically, these are hidden powers. So if you look at the traditional view of causality, you first have the elemental causes, so air, earth, fire, and water. And again, not seen as being physical earth, but rather these are states, more like states of matter. They're underlying modalities that things can be part of. So earth would be solid, water is liquid, air is gas, and then fire would be plasma or energized, energy or whatever, however you want to conceptualize that in modern terms. Now, beyond, though, the elemental nature of things, there's also, as I said, these occult virtues, these hidden virtues. Now, what are those? What are the hidden virtues? And that's what we're basically dealing with astrological magic. Astrological magic does not, for the most part, deal with elemental powers. It deals with occult virtue. So the ultimate source, really, of occult virtue is in the One. And everything appears in a unified and perfect state in the One, and then manifest in a differentiated but still perfect state as the Platonic ideas, archetypes. You can think of angelic intelligences. These are the ultimate underlying essence of things. And then they manifest as seminal ideas, so like a seed idea. You can think of like a seed, like it's got a tree, it's got everything it needs to become the tree in there. So this is the seed form or seed idea in the anima mundi, the soul of the world. And then there's all these incredible sort of streams, interconnections of spiritual sympathy that interconnect and intertwine and flow through all the celestials. So that includes the constellations, the stars, and the planets. They then manifest as number, ratio, images, sounds, and characters. Okay, again, the forms. And then in the most imperfect and most differentiated state is in material things. So a mage is someone who traces this complex and hidden interconnection of occult virtue. And so the sense of higher, and I don't mean in the sense of a locality, a location sense. I mean, the stars are above us, but it's more in the sense of perfection. So the higher, the more perfect thing is closer to the divine, more unified, less mixed, and it has power and influence over things that are more less perfect. So that's one of those key principles. And so this is part of the great chain of being, and again, that would be all sorts of individualized chains when we get down to the level of the celestials. And so a good example of this, Marsilio Ficino, in his 3 books on life, he says it hangs down from every star its own series of things. So it says, for example, under the celestial serpent, which is a constellation, it says the constellation of the serpent bearer, they place Saturn and Jupiter. And then the daemons, the spirits who take on serpent form, men who are like serpents, the stone draconite, snakeweed, serpents themselves. So that's occult virtue of that's in the form of a snake, is transmitted and is connected through all these different things. So again, you can see this idea of the higher and lower influencing each other, and in fact, it goes further than that because they contain each other, and in fact, they're unified. So in every form that we see is in a material form is containing all these, like I said, number, ratio, the celestials, the archetype, and then also is the one. All those are simultaneously present, and they're not in some other place. They're right here, right now. Everything is contained in the cosmos, is right in front of us. So one of these key, as we're talking about form, this is again a very important sort of model or technique that's used in astrological magic. And one of the key sources for this is a Centiloquium attributed to Ptolemy. And it says, in the generation and corruption of all things, the celestial forms are used because they control the earthly forms. And so constellations and signs, which of course, the constellations are the origin of the signs, are really key sort of form. I mean, we've got over 1,000 visible fixed stars arranged in 48 constellations. You've got 12 zodiacal constellations and 36 extra zodiacal constellations. These are all, they all have a particular form. They all have a particular, if you think of Orion, or you think of the Ursa Major, the bear, they all have a particular form or an image. And so this is used in astrological magic all the time. So for example, Thabit ibn Qurra, it's a Haranian Sabian, in his De Imaginibus, he talks about wanting to get rid of scorpions. And of course, if you've ever been in the desert, scorpions are really a pain. They'll get in your shoes, get in your bedding. So there's tons of talismans for getting rid of scorpions. And they almost always use Scorpio because the celestial scorpion controls the earthly scorpions. They have the same form. This is a more perfect version of it. The occult virtue is stronger in it. And so if you make a talisman using Scorpio rising, for example, you could use Scorpio culminating as well. You can look at De Imaginibus for the exact details of it, but essentially you use Scorpio as the focus of your talisman in order to affect the earthly scorpions. So that's right there a reason why the constellations are very useful. When I first started out doing astrological magic, people were very comfortable with the planets, but were kind of iffy about anything else. Like, for example, fixed stars, they were just like, I don't know about, never heard of that. I'm not comfortable with it. Now what's happened is people are increasingly comfortable with fixed stars. And so constellations really, I think, are kind of cutting edge right now. It's where people are kind of experimenting. They're getting into them. But to me, when I look at a constellation talisman, essentially, I'm so heavily soaked in the traditional approach. It seems to me to make sense to base the constellation talismans on the fixed star talismans. So, for example, if you look at Hermes on the 15 fixed stars in our Quindescent Stellus comprehensive translation, you can see a link to that on the page. They're basically, if you look at all these different recipes, the fundamental recipe for a fixed star talisman is the fixed star rising or culminating, and the moon applying to conjoined sextile or trine the fixed star, and then the moon and fixed star unafflicted. And again, because constellations are made of fixed stars, it really seemed logical to me to approach them as a fixed star. And interesting enough, this is exactly the approach that Marsilio Ficino, the Renaissance mage, also took. So if you look at 3 books on life, he says, for example, I plan to engrave a lodestone with the figure of the celestial bear, so Ursa Major, when the moon was in one of her better aspects with it, so in other words, conjunction, sextile, trine, and then to wear it as a talisman. So that's exactly the same methodology. And he goes and talks about Serpentarius, also a constellation, says you make it when the moon aspects Serpentarius. So again, this is the traditional approach. Again, you treat it like a fixed star, and that's how you do the electional, astrology for a constellation. So it's a little more complicated in some ways because with a fixed star, it's in a specific degree. So you just put that specific degree rising or culminating. With a constellation, the constellations can be very large. So how do you do that? What I tend to do is to use a marker star. And the advantage of this is that it's very difficult to tell when a constellation begins or ends. I mean, that's one of the problems with the sort of age of Aquarius is, well, where is the boundary of Aquarius? Very hard to say. But I use a marker star. I've typically been using a marker star in the middle of the constellation. Now, I've also seen people use the brightest star in the constellation. I mean, both of these seem reasonable to me. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer for that. I mean, find which resonates for you. And there's a logic behind, like I said, the middle part is sort of the middle of the constellation. Brightest star is kind of you can see again the connection to the constellation. When we're looking, again, in traditional astrology, we don't just make stuff up. What we do is we want to look at our sources. We want to see what our illustrious predecessors did. The key sources for Constellation Talismans, the one I use the most is probably Albertus Magnus, who was a medieval natural philosopher. He wrote a book called De Mineralibus on stones that has a lot of constellations in it, and also there's an even older source that Albertus Magnus is relying on called De Lapidibus. So if you're interested in sources on fixed stars, our Celestial Gems and Sigils is a link to this. This has got your basic, these are lapidaries, which give the magical powers of stones, but it has a lot of constellation sources in it. It tells us about a lot of constellations. And then if you look at my fixed star sign and constellation magic book, this book has the Albertus Magnus in it, but also gives a lot of practical information, provides you with images, invocations, explains the electional technique for making constellation talismans. So again, very useful. And again, for both of those books, you can find links on the YouTube page there. Very interesting. And the other thing I wanted to share with you was our newest constellation talisman that kind of prompted this video. And these are Cygnus talismans. And as you can see, it's just a gorgeous talisman, Cygnus the Swan. This is the image that's used for consecration, meditation. Really amazing talisman. First of all, I think they're really beautiful. I have a soft spot for any kind of waterfall. Love swans and ducks and things like that, so that's perfect. I like it. I was able to do a really gorgeous image for this. And then this is an amazing talisman because it does so many things. I mean, usually talismans are going to be basically one function. This Cygnus talisman is good for riches, for great knowledge, for health, and for love. So that's like, wow, 4 big areas, and you normally don't get a talisman that does all those different things. This is interesting. This is from a source that I had just kind of stumbled across. Was really happy to find out when I was kind of researching lapidaries. This is not one of our books, but it's a Renaissance mage, Camillo Leonardo, his Mirror of Stone. So it's another lapidary. But it has some really cool constellation talismans in it, including Cygnus. And as soon as I read this, I'm like, man, we've got to make this talisman. I'm really kind of excited about having it. So definitely, again, there's links to that. Renaissance astrology really has the greatest selection of constellation talismans. This is something I've been interested in for a long time, and it takes a while to build up, your inventory because you got to wait until appropriate, elections come along. But I'm very excited to be working on Constellation Talismans. Like I said, I think they're really cutting edge. And not only are we getting the benefit of the magical effects, which I think are really great, and obviously that's something people are really interested in, but I also think that Constellation Talismans really bring home to us the importance of understanding this traditional views of causality, because the constellations are a key link in the great chains of being, the multiple chains, in particular this idea of form, that everything that has a similar appearance, everything that has a similar arrangement, everything that has sort of numerical ratios that connect it is connected. And more than connected, I mean, ultimately, I think if you really deeply penetrate into this, what you recognize is this is not a cosmos made up of a bunch of separate individual things bumping into each other. It's not a cosmos where nothing is supreme, where the modern nihilism is really the idea of how things operate. What it is that everything is not only connected, but everything is unified. Everything really is one. And the task of the mage is to trace these connections, but the task really of the sage is to attain this true conscious experience of oneness, and that's really enlightenment. So I think that, again, the magical effects are cool, but if we engage with these, if we see how they work, then it's giving us this glimpse of the underlying unity of the cosmos, which I think is really the most valuable thing of all that we can get from our study of the esoteric areas. So again, I hope you find it interesting. Check out the Cygnus talismans, the books, the other talismans, and then you can also, if you're interested in the spiritual side of it, also check out my book, The Celestial Way, when there's a link to that, which is, again, these are all very important way stations on the path to enlightenment, if that's a path that you're interested in. So good. Hope you enjoy that. I'll look forward to doing more videos and more talismans and to walking on this exciting path.